Are you a crappy partner, crappy wife, crappy husband, crappy mate? This podcast is for you. Give yourself the gift of self-awareness. Learn new skills. Take the time to assess your partnership, marriage, relationship, etc. So how are we going to do this? Start by taking the Crappy Mate quiz. The quiz can be found on our website, www.crappymate.com, on Pinterest, Crappy Mate, Instagram and Facebook, Crappy Mate Podcast. We will dedicate episodes to discussing the quiz topics. In further episodes, we will be exploring common problems, the speed bumps that occur in relationships. Also, we will introduce time-tested skills and helpful hints to enhance your relationship, and we invite you, our listeners, to contribute your thoughts, questions, or concerns regarding relationships. Welcome to the Crappy Mate Podcast. I'm Dr. Richard Vance Barnes, MD. I'm a board-certified general psychiatrist with 25 plus years in psychiatry. I have treated patients in a variety of settings, both inpatient units, outpatient units, partial hospitalization units, as well as detoxification programs and rehabilitation programs. And I've had a private practice for many, many years.
And I'm Barbara Quaid, a marriage and family therapist. I also have over 25 years experience working with families, individuals, and couples. And my life as a therapist has been both humbling and joyful. Before we get started, I'd just like to talk about our disclaimer. The Crappy Mate podcast is designed to be a useful tool to help individuals and couples have happier and healthier relationships. This podcast is not a substitute for individual or couples therapy, and as always, relationships need to be safe. Seek professional help as needed.
The Crappy Mate podcast was developed out of hearing years and years of stories and accounts from patients in therapy about their mates and themselves actually being crappy mates and poorly behaving within the relationship. And so this concept was then developed into a podcast of how can we help people to actually improve upon their relationships.
And so in order to do this, we developed a quiz. And the quiz, we really thought about some concepts that we thought were important in a relationship. And so the Crappy Mate quiz ended up being a 10-question self-scoring assessment that can be found on our Facebook page. And our Facebook page is aptly named the Crappy Mate Podcast. And along with the quiz, you will find a glossary with the terms we used both in the podcast and on the quiz. And this is so we can all be on the same page. Now, to score the quiz, you will read each question carefully and then ask yourself, do I do this almost always, sometimes, or almost never? And when we thought about this, the scoring is like this. Almost always is worth 3 points. Sometimes 2 points, and almost never 1 point. So once you have your total points, you add them up. And a score of 10 to 17 clearly indicates that one needs improvement. A score of 17 to 24, one has a degree of awareness, but improvement can still be beneficial. And a score of 24 to 30, one is aware, insightful, and acting in a positive manner as it pertains to the relationship.
Welcome to the Crappy Mate Podcast. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the second of a two-part series on living with a narcissistic partner, spouse, mate, etc. So let's define, Barbara, what a personality disorder is, and then we'll talk more specifically about narcissistic personality disorder. So, Barbara, when I talk with my patients about what a personality disorder is, I talk about a lifelong, inflexible style, manner of defending oneself in the world. And people will use defenses that protect themselves against guilt, shame, and anxiety in ways that are really dysfunctional or create problems within their relationships and within their functioning in the world. And so it becomes a really inflexible, rigid way of presenting oneself in the world with some key elements like having a cognitive distorted way of thinking about things, having problems in their interpersonal relationships, having a very rigid way of seeing the world. And most people with personality disorders will see the world as just black or white. They don't have the ability to see it in variations of what it is and shades of what it is in the world. So those are some of the key elements that I see. And quite often there is usually some form of substance use or abuse that personality disorders will also engage in as well. When we talk about narcissistic personality disorder, what are some of the things that we specifically are looking at?
Well, you hit on a lot of them, but I think the interpersonally exploitive behaviors is really high on the list. And what I mean by that is that they use people. They use people for what they can get from them, from the money they can get from them in their relationship with spouses or family members. They use them for what they think they're getting in terms of prestige, etc. They also tend to lack empathy. And again, that's where they are not emotionally intelligent. They can't really put themselves in another person's shoes. Most people think of is the grandiosity, and that's definitely there. It's the grandiosity about feeling like they're better than others or bigger, greater, you name it. It's this grandiosity. They also believe that, and again, this is this cognitive distortion, that people are envious of them, or they feel that they're envious of others. In the way they behave, they're usually arrogant or haughty, better than everyone else.
Well, it's interesting because I always tell my patients, because I use this for myself, is I get a clue in terms of whether or not I'm dealing with a narcissist because in conversation, they never, ever allow you to win.
Right.
And they always have to upstage you and one-up you in conversations. Well, I had that house repainted. Oh, I redid my entire house in my kitchen, in my bedroom, and it came out so wonderful. So whatever you do, whatever you say, you're going to be one-upped with the narcissist.
Definitely. And you're also probably going to feel manipulated. That's a huge one. And the manipulation could be that, I don't know, somehow you decided to invest in their company when you really thought maybe you shouldn't, or different kinds of manipulation, wouldn't you say?
Well, yes, because most narcissists are quite good at charming people. They're quite good at presenting themselves to be so wonderful and they're so special, right? Because that's really what this is about, is that they feel like they have these special talents, that they're unique and that they should be admired because they're so unique. And we should really basically worship them because they're so great. And look at them. They're so great. Look at me. I'm so wonderful. But the thing that's really fascinating about this personality disorder is that underneath it all, inside internally, they feel less than most people. They feel like they don't really measure up and that they really don't have the great qualities that they're representing themselves to have.
Well, when you say that, it's what attracts us to a narcissist. And it's usually that bravado or this bigger than life presentation, the showmanship of it. And we can like their ambitions or their accomplishments because in some ways, many of them have been very accomplished. And then that always begs the question, so what do they look for in a mate? And I think this is really an important piece because the narcissist is always looking for quality. They want beauty or someone that's intelligent or famous or has a lot of money or prestige. I mean, when you think of the phrase eye candy, I think that's what a narcissist wants. eye candy right at their side.
I think it's interesting because what you're really saying, though, is that they want that candy on the side to reflect back on them so that other people will say, oh, he or she has such a beautiful partner.
Exactly.
And so I think everything really revolves around the self-reflection and whether or not I can get more attention because of my beauty or because of my special talents. And I think that's how the narcissist really does think about things.
You're not appreciating the beauty for the other person's sake. It's really that it shows well on you, that you can attract someone that's that beautiful or that rich or that famous or with that much money.
Mm-hmm. Special. Yes.
Special.
Yes, they're very special. So I think it's interesting, too, that how they present coming into therapy when they do come into therapy. Now, mind you, like most personality disorders, they don't think there's anything wrong with them and that the world is really at fault. They, like most other personality disorders, they feel like they're the victims at times, that the world is after them. And why doesn't the world, especially with the narcissist, why doesn't the world recognize how great I am? Mm. So I think that they can go through those kinds of thought processes, but coming into therapy, they're quite interesting. Wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely. What I have found is usually they will come into the office, not because they want to, they have to. Something has forced them to come in.
Coming in under duress, because the relationship's going to end, or, my boss has recognized that I've been too controlling, and so I may be axed or let go. So that might be a reason why I'm going to go into therapy.
I've heard, do you think you can handle this? Their problem is so special and so different that, an ordinary therapist or psychiatrist wouldn't be able to handle their problem.
Well, because they're so unique. They're so special. They're so wonderful. And they have such special qualities and such special, unique problems. You're right. Most therapists, most psychiatrists can't handle this. At least in their minds, this is how they think.
Mm-hmm. Really, what I would like to know is we talked about what happens initially, the initial attraction, both for the narcissist and the narcissist being attracted to someone else. So what happens after they get into a relationship? And I think this is really important and interesting. So, for example, I think the narcissist will tend to isolate their partner because they don't want too much outside influence. They want their partner to be focused on them. Yes. So they don't want the outside input on their behavior, and they don't tolerate criticism.
No, they don't tolerate criticism at all. And because criticism goes to the core of what they believe they have, and that is this greatness, this wonderfulness. And so they don't want to have that image shattered in any shape or form. So the thing that I think you're saying, Barbara, is that they become very controlling in relationships.
Really controlling. This is, of course, just based on my own experience, but they tend to want their spouse to give up their job or their career and focus on them. And again, this is anecdotal, but it seems like a lot of narcissists have large families. And I think it's because their children are there to reflect on them.
Children become pawns for narcissists, and they will be set out into all sorts of directions because their uniqueness, if I can show my kids are so unique, well, then that's going to reflect on me. How great my kids are. Look, my daughter's in dance. My son's in dance. He's also in karate. He's studying another foreign language. And so all of these types of talents that narcissists look for that reflect back upon them, they try and use their children to represent themselves in that way. They have become, in a sense, mirrors for the narcissist. Look how special my child is. Look how unique they are.
And what's really sad about that is that they're not really looking at the child and their own personality and their own personal growth. It's really that reflection.
It's really the reflection, yes. At all costs, we want to be able to look better, right? I mean, that's what the narcissist is all about. I want to look great because I am great. I'm special. I need to look special. So just a little bit to kind of talk about what it's like for the children of narcissists. It's my clinical experience has been with several men that have been raised by really extremely narcissistic fathers. And the thing that's very sad with their relationships is that their fathers, their narcissistic fathers, can never tell them that they love their sons. And they don't say that. And sons will go years and years hoping and wishing that their father will just say, you know, son, I love you. I love what you've done with yourself. I love the kind of man you've become. And they'll never be able to hear that. Sadly, these fathers, these narcissistic fathers can't do that. And the sons will spend an entire lifetime trying to get their father's approval. And it's very sad.
And I wonder what it's like for the daughters, because my guess is that they are looking at those same qualities that they looked for in the spouse, which are beauty and talent. And so they want that to be reflected on them. So their relationship with them might be really transactional.
Interesting. Very interesting. Let's talk a little bit further about just narcissists and living with that narcissistic partner. Well, what do you do to protect yourself? How do you survive the relationship truly? What are some of the elements that go into really surviving this relationship?
Well, I think you really have to do a lot of self-care. And I'm going to be talking about some things you can do in the relationship in our helpful hints. So I've got just a case study that might be interesting for our listeners. So Dr. B, this is a case where a husband and wife, they had a family, and she had breast cancer. And pretty serious breast cancer, went through years of all kinds of treatment and really suffered a lot of pain and anxiety and fear around her diagnosis. But the husband seemed to be pretty much, didn't really look at it, wasn't really concerned. Probably concerned that she might die, but wasn't concerned with her everyday fears or what was going on, wasn't as involved in her medical needs. She ended up having a double mastectomy. And then a little later on, she had to have breast reconstruction. Now, interestingly, that's when he became more interested in her, all the things she was going through, because he wanted her to have enhanced breast size. He wasn't really caring for her particularly and wasn't worried about her well-being. He wanted his wife to look beautiful and large-breasted, eye candy again.
You know, that's a telltale story, case study really, of how the narcissist really views the world in terms of, yes, this breast augmentation will bring more attention to me. Look how wonderful and look how special my wife now looks. Again, it's a reflection upon me as the narcissistic partner. Look how people will be looking at me because now look what I have on my side. Mm-hmm. You know, someone who can garnish more attention for me. It's really a sad affair in as much as I don't think that the narcissist really is very present in the relationship, really. Yeah.
So I have some helpful hints today, and these are for the partner of a narcissist. And number one is set good, firm boundaries. And I know you've heard us talk on and on about boundaries in past episodes, but this is really important. And number two, state these boundaries clearly and concretely. You can't just say something like, I don't like the way you're talking to me, because that's not concrete and it's not clear. Instead, you could say something like, when I feel like you are belittling me, I will walk out of the room and end the conversation. That's very clear and concise. Number three, use I messages. And it's a formula that you use. The person can't argue with it because it's arguing with your feelings. So it goes like this. I feel, and you name the emotion. When, you name the incident. Because. And that's really a helpful way to speak to another person about how you feel. Number 4, with your boundaries, set and enforce your consequences. A boundary is no good if there are no consequences, so you have to do that. You have to set consequences. And 5, be consistent with your boundaries and your consequences. Research has shown over and over again you have to be consistent for these to be valid. And number 6, limit over-talking. Do not defend, argue, or explain. Many of us try to explain ourselves or say, well, the reason I didn't do this is because the narcissist isn't going to hear that. So you just state what happens and then do not overtalk. Try not to overtalk. 7, know your limits. If things do not change, know when you need to make some changes for yourself. And with that, 8, seek supportive friends and professional help. And 9, learn to recognize manipulation because that's going to help happen before and after you're in a relationship with the narcissist. And 10, this is the most important, practice self-care because you're the only one that's going to care for you.
Well, thank you for those helpful hints, Barbara. And thank you to our listeners today for tuning in. And as always, thank you for joining the Crappy Mate podcast episode series. We'd like to close today. And again, we'd like to invite our listeners to subscribe and to continue listening to the series. Thank you. In closing the podcast today, I just want to remind our listeners of our disclaimer. The Crappy Mate podcast is designed to be a useful tool to help individuals and couples have happier and healthier relationships. This podcast is not a substitute for individual or couples therapy. And as always, relationships need to be safe. Seek professional help as needed.
Thank you for listening to the Crappy Mate podcast. We invite you to submit comments, questions, and/or concerns about today's podcast, or give us feedback on relationship topics you'd like to hear covered. We encourage you to try our helpful hints. Give these a go, try them on for size. Remember, you can follow us on our Facebook and Instagram pages under the Crappy Mate podcast. Our website is www.crappymate.com. And please be sure to subscribe. Thank you for listening.